All right, let's talk about managing users. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to create a new user and then log in as that user. It's going to be fun. So in Linux, we have this command user add for adding a new user. We also have user mod for modifying a user and user del for deleting a user. So we're going to call user add. Now let's look at the options. Here we have a bunch of options and none of them are mandatory. We can use them based on our needs. In this lesson, I'm going to use an option, this one. Each option, as you can see, has two forms. The short form with one hyphen and the long descriptive form with two hyphens. Different people have different preferences. So with this option, we can create the home directory for this user. So we're going to say user add -m, and the name of the user is John. Okay, where is this user? Well, this user is stored in a configuration file in the etc directory. So using cat, we can look at that, cat/etc/password. Now, the name is misleading. Passwords are not stored here. We only have user account information. So take a look. So down below, look over here, we have John. So we have multiple fields separated by a colon. First, we have the username. Then we have a colon as a separator. X means the password is stored somewhere else. I'll show you that in a second. Then we have this field. That's the user ID. Now on your machine, you're probably going to see 1000 because prior to recording this video, I created another user, Mosh, and the ID of that user is 1000. So John's ID is 1001. Then we have the group ID. We'll talk about this in the next lesson. Now over here, we have the home directory of this user. So /home/John. And then we have the shell program used when this user logs in. So /bin/shell represents the old original shell program. But we also have bash, which is born again shell, which is the enhanced version of this program. Okay. Now let's say when I log in, instead of using shell, I want to use bash. So we're going to use user mod to modify this record. So let's look at user mod. The option that I'm going to use in this lesson is -s or shell. This is for setting the shell for this user. So we're going to say user mod -s. Now which shell we're going to use? /bin/bash. Which user? John. Okay. Now let's look at etc/password one more time. So look over here. We have John's record and his shell program is bin/bash. Beautiful. Now where are the passwords? Well, in the same directory, we have another file that is shadow. So this is where passwords are stored in encrypted format. I don't know how this really works, but just be aware of this file. This file is only accessible to the root user. Okay. Now let's say we want to log in as Mosh. How do we do that? So we open up a new terminal window to log into our container as John. First, we run docker ps to see the running containers. So here's our container ID. Now we're going to execute a bash session inside this container. So we type docker execute, then we paste the container ID, or we can type the first few letters. Okay. Now we want to run a bash session here. Now if I press enter, nothing happens because we didn't interact with bash. So we have to specify -it interactive. Okay. Now if we run this, we'll log in as root. So now we have two bash sessions. One is in this window, the other is in this other window. Okay. Now we don't want to log in as root. We want to log in as John. So let's terminate this session one more time. We're going to execute a bash session in this container, but before the container name, we're going to supply another option for specifying the user. So -u, which user? John. Now I've logged in as John. You can see that. So John add, and here's the container ID, which acts like the host name. Now look at the prompt. Here we have a $, which means I'm not a root user. I'm just a regular user. In contrast, in this other window where we logged in as root, we have a £. So here we have extra privileges. So back to John's window, let's see what happens if I try to access the shadow file. So cat/etc/shadow. We get a permission denied error. So this verifies that I'm not a root user. Okay. Also, John has a home directory, so if we type cd tilde, we go to John's home directory. Let's look at the path for this directory. So that is home/John. So in this directory, we can store John's files. And when we are done, we can remove John by typing userdel John. Now, I'm not going to delete John because in the next lesson, we're going to add John to a group. So we're going to keep him for now. Now, one last thing before we finish this lesson. Back to our first window with the root user, we talked about user add. Now, we also have another command that is add user. What is the difference? Well, user add is the original API that was built, but add user is a Perl script that is more interactive and uses user add under the hood. Let's look at it real quick. So I'm going to execute add user and say Bob. So let's see what's going on here. We see a few messages, adding new user Bob, adding new group Bob. So every user that is created is automatically placed inside a group with the same name. So here we can see the group was created and then this user was inserted in this group. Next, we can see the home directory was created and some files were copied. I don't really understand what that means, but here we have a chance to set the password. So this is what I meant by this command is more interactive than the old command. So here we can set the password and then confirm it. And then we can specify additional information about this user. For example, we can specify the full name, we can specify the room number, work phone, and so on. So this is the difference between add user and user add. Quite often, when using Docker for deploying our application, we don't want to use add user because we don't want to interact with this command. So we want these commands to be executed under the hood. So be aware of the differences between these two commands. Next, we're going to talk about managing groups.